A pioneering venture starting in 1927 with a barnstorming operation by three Levins brothers, Claire, Arthur, Walter, the company was active for 84 years in the Canadian aviation industry, in flying instruction, rebuilding, servicing, parts distribution, manufacturing and selling aircraft, and operating a wartime training school for navigators. Levins Aviation began in 1927 with a single Swallow biplane purchased by Arthur Levins after he took a flying course in St. Louis, Missouri at the Robertson Aircraft Corporation, perhaps inspired by Charles Lindbergh, chief pilot for the company, who was one of his instructors. Soon the three Levins brothers were involved, Claire, Arthur, and Walter, and Levins Brothers Air Service began as a barnstorming operation. Rides were offered at $3 for a 10-minute flight, and to replace the Swallow, a Curtiss Jenny, the famous JN-4, was acquired, and a year later a Waco 9 was purchased and repaired, able to take up two paying passengers as the pioneering venture developed. As business grew, shortly afterwards a long-wing Eagle Rock was purchased, rebuilt, and put into the air as the second aircraft to carry two passengers at once. In 1929, a Waco 10 was refurbished and added to the Levins brothers' small fleet of biplanes. Now the brothers needed an airfield of their own, and part of the family farm near Belleville, Ontario, was converted to an airport, when an apple orchard was cleared to make space for a runway, hangar, and shops. In 1931, a de Havilland Gypsy Moth was added to the operation, taking many passengers up for their very first flight. For 10 years, barnstorming was the backbone of the business, with flights offered from the Rocky Mountains to the Maritime Provinces. But times were tough in the Great Depression, so to cope with conditions, the Levins boys developed a flying circus with their fleet of airplanes. A Model A truck was bought and outfitted with a model airplane on top and signs promoting rides, now down to $1 a flight. As an added attraction for the flying circus, Clem Ennis was hired as a parachute jumper who would step out of the aircraft onto the wing and whose parachute opened with a static line as he leaped into space. In those lean years, the brothers kept operating, but flights were now down to 1 cent a pound based on the weight of the passenger. In 1932, a Pitcairn Autogyro was purchased, a strange-looking airplane, but one that served the company for 20 years, used in a variety of tasks from carrying passengers to crop spraying, towing advertising banners, and for aerial photography. And by the late 1930s, Levins Brothers Aviation still had 5 aircraft operating. In 1936, the company moved to Toronto, renting space at Barker Field and hiring instructors for a flying school. Ben Duffy became the first student, obtaining his pilot's license on July 28, 1937. And in 1938, Taylorcraft airplanes were represented by the company, having acquired rights to represent them. However, tragedy struck the Levins family when Art Levins was flying a de Havilland Plus Moth and a wing came off on a short flight in June 1938, with the resulting crash taking the lives of pilot Art Levins and his 2 passengers. But the company continued on to operate the largest flying school in Canada, with 4 schools at Barker Airport, Toronto Island Airport, Windsor, and Larder Lake. In 1939, one of the flying schools was featured on the cover of Levins Brothers promotional material. You could learn to fly at Levins Brothers, or you could take a special flight in a de Havilland Dragonfly. When the Second World War broke out, Levins Aviation was involved in operating No. 4 Air Observer School at London, Ontario, to train navigators for the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, when Avro Ansons were used for navigator training, and 60 Levins pilots and a dozen or more Royal Canadian Air Force pilots flew the aircraft for trainees. Following the war, the company continued to diversify, offering services such as aerial spraying for mosquito control in Quebec forests, and for 25 years operated an airmail and passenger service from Leamington to Pelee Island with a variety of aircraft. A post-war drop in the aviation market prompted the brothers to explore other ventures, which included taking on a General Motors automobile dealership and getting into the design and manufacture of fiberglass boats, which can still be found in service today. In 1948, when fleet manufacturing went out of production, Levins took over building the popular Fleet Canuck for 10 years until parts ran out. Other aircraft were handled when the company became the Canadian distributor for Aeronca aircraft and was established as the Ontario distributor for the versatile and amphibious Republic Seabee. Levins later handled the twin-engine turboprop Mitsubishi aircraft from the company's new hangar at the Toronto International Airport. Service, parts, maintenance, and engine rebuilding had begun in the early days of Levins Brothers, and by 1970 there were branches in Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, and Calgary, with 80 men and women employed. Despite tough times for aviation in the 1970s and 80s, the company continued on, well known in Canada, and the subject of Aviation magazine features about the company's success over the years. In 1977, to mark the 50th anniversary of the family-owned company, a restored 1928 Waco 10 biplane was put in the air and flown for 23 years, then donated to the Canada Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa. After downsizing the company in 2011, the decision was made to close down operations. And after 84 years on the Canadian aviation scene, the unique and diversified company, started by 3 Ontario farm boys, closed its doors. Levins Aviation was presented with the Belt of Orion Award for Excellence from Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame at ceremonies held in Montreal on June 14, 2012.